If a world is in a horrible place, we shouldn't respect the way it is. We should try and create change. We from Opening Government want individuals in society to be heard, to be given what they were promised in democracy, to achieve social change that they dearly wanted. The problem within status quo is that individuals within society aren't being given what they want. For example, in Ferguson, because of the situation there, it caused the acquittal of a white officer that shot a black man and caused social unrest because the government didn't make the fair decision. This debate is a value judgment because the state cannot legitimize this problem anyway. We think that it's illegitimate. Why is it illegitimate for? I mean, why is this illegitimacy necessary? Because we think that it is a last resort in every circumstance. This signifies that that other means were tried and they failed. Things like discourse, things like peaceful protest, those ideas failed, and people went on to carry out these riots. This is why riots happened, because there was no other way to achieve peace and fairness. I'll present you two arguments. Firstly, how do we facilitate democracy? And secondly, why morality isn't a priority within these situations. Before I move on, sure.
Every 4 years, you get to vote your government in, and you vote your government out if you're unhappy with them. Why isn't that democracy enough to place your views and opinions in society?
No, we think that 4 years is a very long time, and we don't think that we should wait for this amount of time to wait for fairness to happen, to wait for a social change to happen. We don't want society to go through the harms and go through the unfairness that the government has to take responsibility for, but they didn't within situations. So the first argument, how do we facilitate democracy? On the first level, let's characterize democracy. Democracy is about the people. People make up the nation. We think that people affect the government legislations and the choices that they make, right? So government is a representing body of the people as a whole. But on the second point, when do protests happen? We think that protests happen within, rough protests happen within two situations. Firstly, when there are there were horrible incidents happening within society. For example, Ferguson. Secondly, where the politicians do not fulfill their manifestos in providing for the societal need and societal change. What does our policy do? We think that the government has the ability to cater for peaceful protests, right? So because there is no damage caused within peaceful protests, right? So there is no incentive or no political will for the state to change these peaceful protests, right? So this is why this is another reason to why people resort to rougher and more illegal means, right? But when we legitimize these actions, we think that we make two things happen. Firstly, we keep governments in check. We keep governments in check. Secondly, we make sure that manifestos by the government are completed, and we make sure that these manifestos will create social change within the near future. The conclusion of this argument is that a democracy that doesn't facilitate people is not a democracy. So we think that within the situations when we legitimize this action of a legal means, we already recognize that these people are going through such harms, and we don't think that the state hasn't taken any action. And we also believe that when we legitimize this action, we give the state the incentive to carry out these acts, because there is damage being caused by society. The society is opposing the government, so they have to make that choice. Before I move on to my second argument, sure.
So you understand that this applies in the context that minorities are oppressed. Are you willing to allow these minorities to use illegal protests to the extent that they may incite civil war?
Yes, sure. We think that these civil war are for. I mean, we think that these situations are for good means, right? When this good means ensure that the government will make decisions to support society and to make decisions that is needed for social change, we think that it's legitimate, right? And that's the debate, right? But on the second argument on why morality is not a priority, we think that when morality already went out the window, when the government failed to provide for the democracy and what the society wanted within these situations, so the government didn't really facilitate morality when riots happened within status quo within Ferguson, and this justifies why the government didn't take steps to the government didn't take steps to facilitate morality in the first place. So we need social change before we can be moral, and this is why we think that a lot of riots happen within society. But when have moral acts failed? We think that we want to maintain democracy because it's a priority, right? We think that morality can only go so far because it cannot. Morality can only go so far because it cannot provide. I mean, it cannot prevent the harms that happen within society, right? For example, discrimination or harmful policies that the state proposes. Within the morality, within the situations, the state fails to provide for these. I mean, for these discriminations that happen in society, that happen in Ferguson, and I mean, on racial discrimination and things like that. So morality only can go so far in providing for that fairness, right? But when there is discourse, when there's discourse between, we think that when there's discourse between government, that discourse doesn't necessarily do anything because the government doesn't facilitate what the society necessarily wants because they were being unfair and they fail to do so. The conclusion of this argument is that when we achieve societal change, then only we have morality, because now the society gets what they want, and they get what they wanted. They get what they wanted when they were fighting for those things in the first place. When they started discourse towards the government for that societal change. Madam Speaker, we think that the government has failed in helping society to foster for social change, and therefore we think that when the government fails, only the society can take action.
We thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. You start against working out.
Democracy is indeed important. It's what both sides of the House concede. But when violence is involved, to achieve that democracy, we don't think that's what side opposition will stand for. Before I begin my case, two rebuttals. Is violence really the last resort? Because we don't think so. Because in order to achieve peace, we can't use violence, and it directly contradicts to what we are fighting for. There are many examples. For example, Mahatma Gandhi, who went on a hunger strike, and even in Hong Kong in the Umbrella Movement. We think that violence is never the last resort, and in my second rebuttal, I'll engage you, even if it is why peaceful protesters will actually have incentives, right? So why is there actually an incentives when there's peaceful protests? We think that yes, because when you have peaceful protests, when you have peaceful protests, international support will come, right? When other countries view you as trying to fight for what you believe in a peaceful manner, that's what's right. For example, how in Hong Kong, where the protest even made it to the Times Magazine, I just started. When even made it to the Times Magazine, we tell you that the pressure that this international will put onto this country, it's extremely benefits, and this will incentivize the government to actually make it happen. So first argument is why this does not grant illegitimate political leverage to individuals. First response is like, do protests work in achieving social change? We tell you that yes. First reason is that the government has to conform to the need of the protesters, or else they won't stop protesting. And even then, we tell you that these are the kinds of And the second reason is that the government have political accountability, meaning that they need to conform, and or else they will be voted out in the next election. We think that even though time sensitivity is important, but however, the moment you take up arms, the moment you violently protest against the government, it's when all your protest goes to waste. That even if you initially went against when you peacefully protest, we tell you that the moment you take up arms, it's harmful to not only the protest and to the government. And before I move on to why is it principally unjustified to use illegal methods?
Just curious, what about states where protest at all is illegal, like in China? What do you do then?
We think that it's important to recognize that these protests happen for a reason, and even if it is illegal, we think that okay, that we're not totally against protest as a whole, because there is democracy. However, when you take up violence, when you use violence, when you attack when you try to attack the government, we don't think that's right as a whole. So why is it principally unjustified to use illegal methods? Because they've already gone too far. The fact that they already are protesting, when they already have the political control, for example, the government already gave you the right to vote, already gave you the right to change what is already in status quo, we think that they've overstepped their boundaries. And furthermore, when you allow them, when you think that it's all right for them to use violence as a mean to get social change, we don't think that's right. So this side of the house has to prove to us why is it principally inconsistent that happens in protest itself, and that they are fine with their illegitimate and dangerous actions that will not only harm the individuals and harm the state itself. So what are the negative? So moving on to my second argument on what are the negative outcomes. Now the government are less likely to conform with them, because even if because protesters are now regarded as enemies of the state. The moment where they start taking up arms and they are already considered that they're okay with a civil war. We don't think that's okay, because the moment when you're regarded as a terrorist, that's when you even more harm more individuals as a whole, and the government aren't less likely to conform with you. So why is this bad? Because even after you've been protesting for so long, it will all go to waste. Even if you have been peacefully protesting for so long, it doesn't change anything, because now the government has now the government will never conform, because the government has an international policy to not negotiate with terrorists, where the government do not abide by the laws. And secondly, on what's the negative outcomes, is that now the issue itself will be thought as a corrupted issue that will never be spoken about. It means now, and because of the use of illegal means, this will harm the principle of protest itself, and it's harmful. So why is it bad? So even if it's for the principle, if it's for a good cause, even if it's for fighting for homosexuality. So now you homogenize protesters in general. Now you make everybody seem that that this is what they were fighting for. That means now even if part of the people want a peaceful protest, you never give them opinion, because you think that violence is the only answers. So you need to tell us that why it's legitimate for protesters. Hold on, it's legitimate for protesters to be stigmatized as bad people, even though there are many kinds of people that don't want violence. You need to tell us that why that's harm. And before I move on, Sean.
Isn't government actions like the acquittal of the white man that killed the African American also a form of discriminatory violence towards society?
We think violence will even more deteriorate under your side, because now you're allowing them for a leeway to fight simply because you think that this is the type of democracy you want. You allow them to use violence, and we don't think that's beneficial. So my third argument on why this policy harms innocent lives, because for example, this is why we ban vigilantism, right? Even though it's for a good cause, even though that it can somehow help the police department, we don't think, because then you can hurt people in the crossfire, and we don't think that that's fair to innocent people. Because what will protesters do in the end, right? How they will have random violence in public simply to get attention simply to get attention from the government. How they will directly attack members of the state and directly harm the state simply because he's just following the orders. He's just doing what needs to be done. We don't think that this is justified, and we don't think this is what we stand for. So why is this bad? Because now the movement itself will lose support. Now international do agree with you, how other countries do agree that the government isn't treating you bad, but when they look at you, how you're dealing with, when you're using violence, when you're throwing stones at these kinds of protests, we don't think that's harmful. So now the movement will eventually lose its support and will not garner any more support as a whole. So this side of the what side opposition is fighting for is for, in order for us to have democracy, in order for us to have social change, we can't use violence, because because there is always another alternative in order for you to change. I beg to oppose.
That's good. 4 years is a lot of time. Time that could be used to harm society, time that could be used to execute laws that specifically target minority groups that are being oppressed within society, that are based upon these governments. It could also be used to strike fear into society, to create an everlasting government of oppression. This happened, well, it's pretty evident that it happened in Egypt when it was done by Hosni Mubarak. The point that we're making here is that opening opposition can't tell us the only way that we can achieve peace is by voting the government out. That suggestion is illegitimate, as assumed by the debate in itself. Because these are individuals who are oppressed. These are individuals who've gone to a last resort because discourse has changed. It has not created change. Things like campaigns have not created change. Things like peaceful protests have not created change. These are social change that society craves. A democracy that does not cater to society is not a democracy at all. I'm going to prove to you one argument, how it creates or generates awareness within society from international and from local institutions, and why that is good in keeping governments within check. But before that, a few responses towards opposition. The first thing that they accused us of was violence not being a last resort. In a lot of circumstances, violence might not be the last resort, but that is when this debate doesn't take place. When it could be solved peacefully, this debate doesn't occur. This debate occurs for governments that actively oppress people who don't cater to peaceful protest. That is why we're debating today, Mr. Speaker. That is why it is a legitimate last resort that people have been pushed in a corner towards. The second response I'm going to make is towards governments, their assumption that governments are less likely to conform towards the people, right? We don't care because governments have to conform at the end of the day. Their property is being damaged. Society is standing up against them. That isn't a concern because they will eventually have to change. Like in Ferguson, even though governments are not conforming or accepting that they made a mistake, the immense criticism from foreign and from local individuals is creating that change or facilitating the criticism that we want to generate. So even if governments don't change, we do raise awareness, and that is a marginal benefit that this side can't prove. The third one, that they told us that you're harming individuals like state officials, like people who never consented. They just passed laws that governments push. These are individuals who also believe in these laws, whether they want to believe it or not. These are people who believe in what they're pushing forward, because politicians are individuals who push and stand on their own principles, Mr. Speaker. That means you can't tell us a politician who is going to be harmed didn't believe in his ideologies, didn't believe in discriminating minorities under these circumstances. They are defending the wrong people. So this debate is not about innocent individuals being harmed. It's about individuals who have already done violence to society, who already discriminated society, politicians who believe that what their acts were justified. The last response I'm going to make is this assumption of homogenization. We can pinpoint who is who, right? Because individuals who are violent in nature do conduct these acts. And if states want to take actions will be taken against these individuals, not individuals who are peaceful. But even if we think that homogenization to some extent is good, because we encourage more individuals to stand up to the government, to fill that void, or to go within that last resort, because they know that their rights are not being facilitated. No, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talked about a lot of analysis that wasn't appreciated by the Leader of Opposition. He talked about how we need to facilitate democracy, and governments don't have the ability or are not doing that under these circumstances. Democracy is made of the people. If it doesn't cater to the people, then we should call it something else. It's a last resort for a reason, because these are individuals who are desperate. These are individuals who are promised manifestos when they voted the government in. Actually, that's another reason why their 4 years thing won't work, right? Because politicians also have the ability to continuously lie to the people and then go through the entire 4 years opposing people and oppressing people. This is why status quo won't work. Secondly, he talked about morality not being a priority. We need to put democracy ahead of morality. When democracy has failed, we don't see a need for people to be moral. We don't see a need for people to abide to state laws that protect them itself. We talked about how the state is being immoral under these circumstances, considering that the state is being immoral and moral actions have failed. And we've proven that all actions have failed. People have to be moral. Once we have established morality, once we have established government being more transparent and more in check with the people, that is when morality becomes a concern. That is when we can facilitate it. Before I move on to my argument on how we create awareness, open it.
Your side of the house is okay with the escalation of war. How will that not harm innocent people who aren't part of the movement in the first place?
This motion assumes civil wars being justified, i.e., if this minority was actually oppressed, we are fine with them standing up for their rights. We don't think they should be continuously oppressed and not stand up for their own principles, Mr. Speaker. A civil war versus being oppressed is a pretty simple decision. If these are individuals standing up for their own rights in minorities, civil wars or violence in itself is better than continuous oppression by the state, continuous oppression that they haven't given us an answer to. Let me move on to my argument, how we generate awareness. Having diplomatic talks or even refuting with the state doesn't create change, but rioting with violence does. What kind of awareness do we generate? Societal awareness. More people will try to question whether their rights are at stake or rights not being facilitated the moment they see their peers or other members of their country fighting for those rights. These things are extremely hard in peaceful protests because governments have the ability to cover up these peaceful protests and not show them to the rest of the world. Even if governments are doing wrong to society, they have the political power to hide these individuals who are doing peaceful protests and prevent the rest of society from seeing it. So even if peaceful protests were to work under their paradigm, not many people would know about it. Why? The second reason, media awareness. Governments facilitate media. That means if people are not aware under their paradigm, we have governments that can continuously oppress individuals. This could be seen in the Arab Spring, right? When individuals stood up, when they used media as an avenue to share awareness about how they were being oppressed and why they needed to take actions. This is the kind of change we want to facilitate. But media awareness causes two things. One, international criticism, and we think that that's good. Things like political ties or economic ties are at stake because governments are being oppressive towards the citizens. Governments are facilitating human rights abuses. Sure, foreign countries won't accept that the actions that these individuals are doing are legitimate, but foreign countries and their eyes are open to the horrible human rights abuses that are happening within these countries. So things like political ties are very hard for these countries to achieve if they don't create or facilitate that change. Discourse change only happens with last resort, or only happens with protests that create change. If this side of the house can't prove to us how we deteriorate racism and oppression and discriminative policies, we think that this is the way to create change.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister to close on behalf of the Leadership Leaders.
Perfect. Hello. One thing that side opening government failed to respond to is that while governments have an intention to crack down on its people, while governments have an initiative to make the lives of the everyday man harder and harder, we think that opening government failed to prove why people intentionally want to hurt people. Because if governments want to be voted in within the next election, they have an incentive to do what's in the best interest of their people, or else they get voted out and they will not be the government anymore. This side of the house must tell us why that's illegitimate in the first place. Two questions I'm going to ask to start opening government. Number one, is generating awareness important in today's debate? But number two, how will it necessarily facilitate democracy? Number one, why will generating awareness fail?
Firstly, we ban things like eco-terrorism, even though it spreads awareness, because we understand that there are specific and negative repercussions that come from legitimizing eco-terrorism. Because you harm innocent people and you harm individuals who do not want to be a part of the social movement, you harm individuals who just don't want to be there. This side of the house must tell us why they are fine with harming people on the ground. But secondly, awareness is something that can be done anyway. You can still tell people, you can still spread awareness to the international community that these are issues that have to be considered. You must help us and tell us what to do in these circumstances. But thirdly, if awareness is something that they really want to fight for and we are willing to trade it off, we're so willing to trade it off for something like peace, which inherently benefit this side of the house. Second question, how will it facilitate democracy? Democracy may be about the people, but democracy is also about peace. Democracy is about discussions and discourse that can exist in a peaceful and civilized manner where individuals can put out their opinions instead of hurting other innocent lives that we don't want to stand for. But secondly, you still have the ability to people to vote out. This means that governments have a natural incentive to try their very best to look that they're doing well, to do things that are in the best interest of their people, or else they'll get voted out. But let's revisit what Nicholas told you in today's debate. That was not responded to by side opening government. Firstly, he told you that it's an illegitimate political will for the social movements to begin with. Because most countries, the United States of America, don't negotiate with terrorists or people who use violence against the state. And this will harm the movement in itself. Because you want a discourse, but at the end of the day, you're not getting it because people at the government will never want to talk to you and never want to condone to what you say. So then they told you, oh no, they will conform to these individuals. This side of the house perpetuates a stereotype. This side of the house perpetuates something that will repeat. At the end of the day, people will assume that the only way I can get my voice out, regardless of whatever it is, I will have to conform to violence. I will have to conform to only this method in order to put my opinions forward. Secondly, he told you why the issue will be regarded as an issue that's corrupted and wrong. He didn't respond to the fact that Nicholas spent a lot of time telling you that these are issues that are important, but when they are methodologically wrong to these individuals, people start to resent it, because when you use an illegitimate manner to get to an issue, no matter how innocent and how good it is, it's still wrong by a lot of individuals' standard. But lastly, he never responded to the innocent lives argument that this side of the house is willing to defend how people or protesters, or terrorists, as we like to call them, are willing to take hostages, are willing to make bomb threats to the government and tell them that if you don't conform to what we want at this particular point in time, you will have people dying, you will have hundreds of lives. Everything that in itself is harmful. They harm people who at the end of the day are just doing things that they have been doing from their superiors, who have been doing things that superiors intended for them to do within something that we don't want to conform from side opening opposition. Yep.
Stop exaggerating. People are trying to protect people out there. Why would they use things like bombs and hostages if they want to facilitate democracy?
Because if you
give rights to every other citizen that the government is failing to accord.
Because if you want to get awareness and if you want to get influence within society, you need something that is pretty big to scare the shit out of people. So at the end of the day, you need things like bomb threats. You need things like hostages, where you take people in and you basically make people suffer. But let's look at one argument today. Why this harms the movement in of itself? Because there's a specific third party that we have to talk about today's debate, the international supremacy in this debate. How in many movements they have been aided by third parties when states have openly condemned or sanctioned certain states for doing things that they're not happy with and not in the best interest for. Why is the international assistance important in today's debate? A, it provides a specific level of support to a lot of individuals. So when the international community agrees to a particular issue, that it grants some level of legitimacy to how that issue should be conformed. So if United States of America tells you that your issue is something legitimate, that minorities should be given rights, then states have a moral imperative to listen to that, because states have a reputation to protect within an international sphere and an international environment, as they have to do that, or else you either get sanctioned, or B, they may be openly condemned by other parties in society. What happens when this side of the house? So when has international pressure worked? For example, when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, when he wanted with his problems with nuclear war, or when Hassan Rouhani said he was not going to use nuclear war, but the US never believed him, when they sanctioned him at the end of the day, that led to negotiations and talks that led to actually improving the situation within these Middle Eastern countries. Other parties have a significant level of control as to how that issue operates within that particular nation. Why is this bad? Firstly, third parties aren't able to assist in the movement anyway. No, thank you. Why? Two reasons. Number one, they are principally against it in of itself. That means they are principally against violence as an action of a tool. But secondly, they will be condemned by the international community. So other states still have a moral imperative to not do things that are not in the best interest of them, because they will be condemned by other nations in of itself because they have international reputation to protect by this. This means the third parties who can give you assistance, like aid, if it's such a dire thing, or if it's like something like sanctions on the state that is oppressing you, these third parties will never be able to assist you anymore because of these reasons that I've told you. So even if it is a good social movement, people will never ever get help because it's methodologically wrong and people will never do it. This means it's easier for governments to crack down on protesters. This means it's easier for government to control their protesters, knowing that no one is willing to defend these protesters because they use harmful, illegal, and dangerous methods to get to what they want. This side of the house must tell us why it's okay to harm other people, but in of itself, they must tell us why it's okay to risk losing help from the international community if your issue is such of a dire concern. At the end of the day, it becomes a war of attrition. So if the state has multiple resources and a lot of help from other nations, and you protesters don't have anyone like the international community anymore, you're obviously going to lose to the state because the state has more resources, the state is more able to clamp down on you, and you will eventually lose out because what you say is illegitimate to the state. So because it's a war of attrition, we have to understand that both sides of the house need to understand that if you want your issue to be heard, if you want your such an important issue to be recognized by the government, you need peaceful, political, and correct methods in order for you to fulfill what you want. Opening opposition, Mr. Chair, is fine with peaceful protests because we understand there's a representation of what the people want. But when you use illegitimate, illegal method that doesn't harm innocent people, that does not only as well lose international interest, but is just principally and morally abhorrent. Hello.
Right, we thank the FPA of and we call upon the member of that.
Legality means nothing if the laws and the policies in the state does not treat you like a citizen. When they exclude you, they discriminate you, we think there's a moral clause for you to not respect those laws. This debate was never about which side of the house achieves social change. It's about why you need to grant moral legitimacy to the causes to use violent acts, to use things that are illegal. Closing government will be the first one to tell you 2 extensions and 2 reasons to why this violent acts and this illegal means is justified and why it's legitimate for 2 reasons. Firstly, when the laws are not reciprocal to you, you don't have to abide them like a citizen. But secondly, when the illegal acts that are used is different from any other illegal acts because it has moral clause to it, we should allow it. Before that, let's answer a few questions. Firstly, on the idea of violence and civil war, which will also preemptively rebut Evan's case. Why are we okay with hurting people? My first response is I don't care. Because if you are a failed state that continuously harms human violently, when you treat these individuals like no thank you, like second-tier citizens, we are fine with a civil war happening. We think you deserve it. But what's the second deal with it? Second response. But if the fight is that violent, we think it's good. People on the ground can push for the government to change. Thirdly, the government is also pressured to change its policy when violence and insurgents continuously happen within the ground. We think that especially the escalation of violence is very important for us to recognize. But thirdly, we must understand also that other people may be harmed in this process, but when we have to look at the balance of harms in this certain sense. Other people within the proximity of the protest and whatever violence is going on can move away. But what cannot be escaped in what is objective is the policies and the laws and the harms these individuals in this minority face. Tibetans on the ground don't get basic rights. They don't have human rights. They don't even get access to food. And China can continuously treat them like that. When China continuously shuts them down and does not let any violence to happen within the ground, that is why there was no change and there's no ability for intervention. But thirdly, let's look at the idea of change. Because they wanted peaceful change and lobbying, and lobbying for it to happen because that's the most effective way. That's a lie for them to pretend the world is like this, to pretend that lobbying and telling the government your ideals is the way you change the government. We think it's most likely no. We think it's the most likely to stick to the policies and stick to the way they believe, especially when there's no change of ground. That means majority is against you. But thirdly, let's look at the idea of voting the government out. That's most likely not to happen because if the policies are not changed now, if there's no large, rich lobby groups that can change the policies, it's not going to happen. They're not going to vote the government out anyways. But let's look at the idea of the international community. We think unless you are violent, international community cannot enter in. Why? Because there's the UN holds very strongly about sovereignty. We respect the sovereignty of country, even China, to the point that we cannot intervene so long and so forth. These people cannot prove their moral clause to be great enough. We think it's happening in Tibet. For the Tibetans, we think it happens a lot. We think under their paradigm, when they want peaceful talks, who's going to know about your change? Who's going to know about the policies that you're trying to change? Nobody can be able to reach out to them. We think it's more likely to happen under our side. Before that, yes, opening.
Stop rehashing Sean and Kishen and tell me why your side garners support for people when the most powerful party is tied.
What?
When the most powerful party can't help you, tell me why your side garners awareness.
What is the most powerful party? So long and so forth, their sovereignty is there. They can always say there's a legitimacy for us to treat Tibetans this way. They are our citizens. We think that the international community has no clause in a certain sense, and we think under your side it's even worse. But let's look at my two extension. How legality means nothing to the law if the law does not include that. Who are these people we're talking about? No, thank you. We're talking about the minorities within the country when the law excludes them, discriminates them, and set in stone the life they live, and it's a continuous hell. Why does this happen? That means that the law, what does this mean? The law is not reciprocal to them. It does not give them basic rights that other citizens on the ground gets. That means that the state fails to fulfill the duty that it has to its people and the mandate that it has towards their own citizen. What are the examples that we have? We think that there's a laws in laws in conservative countries that excludes homosexuals from getting certain rights, that excludes women from getting basic rights that other citizens can get. That means that there's no reason and need for these minorities to also be reciprocal. That means there's no need for them to abide to the laws and resort to only legal means. We think that it gives them reason for them to be illegal in the way in which they get what they want. But especially when these illegal means and these methods, but let's look at the second extension. We think that especially when these illegal means and methods have moral clause to them. What does it mean? We think that let's look at the other laws that are set in stone in society today. We think that there's all the more reason they should be using illegal means, because the way in which the law acts is the way we have illegal acts today. The illegal acts of today has morally, objectively wrong things in principle. That means there are things that are rape, murder, those things have moral clause to it being wrong. That's why we think those acts are illegal. But what does this mean? Why is it principally okay for us to do this? Because we think that when the protests and the illegal acts are different from, there's a moral clause and principle behind it. When you go against an abhorrent law, a policy that dehumanizes individuals on ground, and you're treated with no morals, and the fight against this has to be immoral and has to be illegal too. We think that it's very legitimate. That means that these illegal acts are not the same with other illegal acts. That's why it has to be legitimate. You deserve legitimacy on the ground when you support an objectively moral and a principled thing behind the reasons you use illegal means. But secondly, we also must understand the way people carry those things out. Because if illegal acts is something that we're not okay with, we must understand because there's no moral legitimacy behind those illegal acts. Rape, murder, those things are objectively wrong and they harm other individuals. The moral clause that those minorities hold against is against policies that harm them. That's why we must grant them the legitimacy to be able to fight against those policies and that are extremely harmful towards their life. There's a distinction that we have to draw between the way we carry out those protests. It's illegal, we understand, but when there's a moral clause and you go against something greater and there's no possible for change and it's a last resort, we must grant it. But secondly, when the state does not treat you like human, does not include you in their laws, does not include you in their welfare, and does not care about your well-being, you should not care about the well-being of society as well. We think that when society also goes against you, the way we get change is very different. When the international community also cannot opt into you, we think it's harmful for you to allow these individuals to sit back down, to allow the government to continue shutting them down and not letting them get their voices heard. How we achieve change is subjective, but we think that there's a moral cause between everything that they do. There's a moral cause between the way they are illegal, so we must grant them that legitimacy.
Okay.
Right, we thank the member of government, we welcome the member of media.
We agree that these laws are oppressive. We agree that these laws are morally reprehensible. But the core idea behind these laws is that violence is created towards these individuals. The very moment you attach that same violence towards your cause is the very moment your cause becomes as illegitimate as the laws of your country itself. Let me tackle Deborah's case. The basic principle is this. Coming from CEO is this. Morality cannot come through acts of immorality. In principle, we don't think you should destroy the rights of others to achieve the fulfillment of your own rights. More often than not, the illegal means used is not directed towards the perpetrator of the discrimination towards the minority, but innocent people on the ground who aren't directly involved in the equation. Riots, people are killed, property is destroyed. But this is how we go beyond what OO told you. This continues the cycle of hatred. This perpetuates the idea of retaliation. You involve people in this conflict who never wanted to be a participant in the conflict in the first place. You increase the magnitude of destruction, more people are harmed. So, and we say that these people of the majority race or religion which you incite violence against in order to achieve your goals may oppose the very change that these minorities want to create. So we want to question the efficacy of this movement in the first place. But even if it does, sorry ma'am, sorry sir, so even if it does incite change, we don't think the act is still morally right, because you create an irreversible harm through your violence that will stay in your community for ages. And I'll tell you in my extension today how you continue the cycle of oppression for years and years to come and what actual change really means. Secondly, let's tackle what OG's case was. It's basically about awareness and generating changes in policy. We agree that a large amount of awareness is generated, but really what is most likely the narrative that will be painted of these communities who generate this awareness? Brutal protesters, vicious rebels. They'll paint these individuals as perpetrators of conflicts instead of victims of oppression. This is extremely counterintuitive to their cause. But we must also question the converse, because government may easily claim these people who are oppressed, no one cares and no one knows, this is the only way, this is the last resort, that's what they claim. We disagree. We think that it may not generate the amount of hype that violence will create, but there are organizations like Amnesty, which constantly looks out for human rights abuses. Platforms for discussion in the UN are mediums to highlight these problems for proper discussion. We said the only difference between media awareness from violence and outside is that probably a layman in a different continent knows about it. But what really can that layman do? Not much of a change in those situations. Instead, conversely, the first image of your community that you show to that layman in a different continent is that this is a violent group. This is a group that incites oppression towards other individuals who are innocent. We don't think that helps their cause at all. Before I move on to my extension, NEPY. Oh yeah, sure.
States will always be moral under these circumstances. Why should these individuals continue to be victims when the only avenue of expressing their victimization is the media, creating things like tensions or creating things like violence? Why can't this change make it better for these minorities?
I agree. Okay, so look, this is a trade-off which will exclusively come from CEO. We are willing to bite the bullet, even if there's extremely minute chance for change under our side, where people may continue to be oppressed. We think that the magnitude of harm caused by the illegal means of protest doesn't exist on our side. We say that people aren't harmed on our side, and sure, like we say that in your side, people from our country may be displaced. People from our country may be oppressed, especially of the minority race. But that side, where if you agree that illegal means should be used, that side perpetuates the cycle of oppression. More people get displaced, more people get killed, more family gets break up, the nation becomes unstable, and that's what I'll prove to you in my argument today. That's a trade-off we are unwilling to make. Even if there's a minute chance for change under our side, we think that the change on their side, even if it occurs, the cycle of oppression continues, actual change isn't created. I'm sorry, Deborah, I'll take you maybe later, or maybe Christopher will take you, right? So look, why does this create a perpetual cycle of oppression? What usually starts from illegal means of protest is civil wars. We think that it will involve majority race in the conflict itself. This creates tension between those two races or those two opposing religions, or even the state and the people itself. It creates a form of civil war, which generally creates a form of instability within the nation. Leaders of the nation flee for their life, especially like the case in Yemen, right, where the leader fled for his life, and they also flee to escape charges from prosecution, things like that. So who takes over this power vacuum within this nation? Rebels, the military, the people who fought for that change to begin with become governors of the nation. But what really happens when these individuals take over? They form laws to oppress the very individuals who oppressed them in the first place. This is where they feel that they are in a position of power to do the exact same thing which individuals placed upon them in the first place. They still feel angry because their families were oppressed by these people, their brothers were killed, their families were broke up. When they're placed in a position of power, they have the media at their hand, they have the military at their hand. This is when we can relate to the situation in Rwanda, Rwanda, where Hutus and Tutsis, even after continuously trying to change policies and things like that, conflict still continued. The cycle of perpetuation of hatred still continues. We think the actual change that you want to create cannot come through those illegal means, because the magnitude of destruction that you create will only continue to happen. So even if your race, if I'm a minority, if I become in a position of power now, my rights are legitimate, the other race now becomes the oppressed, the other race have their rights diminished, they will continue the exact same means of protest. The cycle of perpetuation of harm will only continue. There's various examples for this, like Burkina Faso, like Libya, like Syria, where illegal means of protest happen. All these states are currently unstable at the moment. We don't see any room for stability or proper change in that nation as of now. I'll take Deborah.
If you're so scared of insurgents and you're so scared of violence, that means that you on that side, on our side, the government with pressure to make that change. If you're, yeah.
No, we don't. Yeah, we think that at the moment where they feel pressure, they know that they committed a crime against a certain community, they escape, they flee. That power vacuum which I talked about is generated. Individuals from the minority race takes over. The cycle of perpetuation of hatred continues. So what is actual change? Actual change can only occur when the state is stable enough to enact the policies which does not discriminate against any race or any religion within that country. We say that even though that chance of actual change on our side is minute at best, right? We say on their side it doesn't occur at all. Without that side, the magnitude of cycle perpetuation of hatred, the cycle of perpetuation of retaliation will only continue for centuries and centuries until your state becomes stable. So we would rather take the risk of that minute chance of us getting that benefit of our state being stable at the moment and also getting our rights being provided with, compared to their side where there's no chance at all, where the cycle of perpetuation continues. If you want to achieve actual change cannot come through acts of immorality. Acts of immorality will only create the magnitude of harm which you started your act of discontentment with. We think it only continues the perpetual cycle of hatred. We are very glad, as a DJN, for the last time my speech, very glad to propose.
Hello? All that side of the house wanted to talk to you about is they do not want the innocent citizens to be harmed. They do not want to have civil war to occur. We think that it's okay for that to happen. We think that they are not innocent citizens. They are the people that also cause these people to be discriminated. We think that they are the people that cause these people to be discriminated. Even if they get harmed, we think that they deserve it because they, in the first place, wanted to discriminate them. 3 things I'm going to do to you today. Firstly, tell you what the closing government talked to you about and why are we the most relevant party in the debate. After that, we'll move on to what the closing opposition and opening opposition try to talk to you about. But before that, let's look at about closing government extension. We told you about how when the law does not include you, we don't think that you should include the law. These people, that the protesters, we see they are the minorities. The state is the one that exclude them and do not recognize them. We don't give them basic rights. We don't give them welfare. We think that this is when the state fails to cater to the citizens. We think that in laws in conservative nations, just like people can't get LGBT rights, we don't sit down with everyone. We think that this is when you give them the reason to give them what they want. We don't see that when the law does not include you, the citizens and the government does not want to include you as part of their citizens, like what happened in China. The China does not want to give rights to the defenders. We don't think that these protesters should actually abide to the law when nobody wanted to include them, nobody wanted to prioritize them in the first place. No.
But we also talk to you about how this illegal means and not normal illegal means. We see that what's happening now about rape and murder, why are these illegal means? Because we think that there is no moral legitimacy to do it. They wanted to murder someone, they want to rape someone because of their own interest, because of their own pleasure. But what's happening here is because they wanted to fight for something that they never be able to go all this while. They wanted to fight for something that the state didn't want to give them after years of suppression, after the years the state wanted to discriminate them. We see that this is the difference. We think that there's a moral clause behind this thing. And if the state if the state sets a policy that is against you and the state sets a policy that harms you, we think that it's okay to do so. This is a different illegal act. We don't think that you can include them and characterize them as the same illegal act as other illegal acts. But what happens here is they deserve the right. They deserve the right for basic rights. They deserve the right to welfare. But if the state do not want to do them, the law does not want to include them, and they get discriminated, we think that it's okay for them to not abide to the law. We think it's okay for them to do illegal means. We think that there is a reason behind it before it opening.
Your side makes it a prerequisite to use violence as a means to getting your voice out. Why should that be the case when multiple innocent lives will be hurt?
We told you about how these people are also people that cause them to be discriminated. But we think that if peaceful protesting can actually work, if democracy that you want to talk about can actually see change, we don't think that we don't think that they will actually go to use illegal means. We don't think that they will go to the extent about violence. But let's see what closing opposition wanted to talk to you about. Evan came on tell you that you cannot harm the people. We think that why are the people within the fight? We think that if they are the brothers or sisters that actually cause this discrimination to happen. But what happens is if they really want to talk about that they are the people that are innocent, we should think that these people should be the ones that help the minorities fight for their rights instead of going against them and supporting the state discriminating them. But here's what I want to talk to you about how it doesn't come at the expense of destruction. We think that the state will only be scared and the state will be pressured, and change is more likely to happen on the outside when we use violence to solve this problem. We think that this is when people will see them as the biggest to their own people, and we think that this is when they take the risk for getting arrested. We do not guarantee that change will definitely happen on the outside, but state is more likely to be pressured. Change is more likely to be happen on the outside. No, Roshan. But they wanted to talk to you about how after Evan also came out with this idea about you lose the support from international other organizations. We think that this international organization won't even enter unless it's state reasoning, because we think that they respect the sovereignty. They will only enter when they see that it's a harm and there is a need for them to enter. And the only way to let them see the harm is when you go against that, when you use violence, when you use illegal means to get what you actually want. But the last idea that Aaron brought up to you is when you give this international organization is giving aid to them to help them. We don't think that is a point for giving them aid. If giving them aid will not be able to help them get what they want, will not be able to help them get the basic rights and the welfare that they have been fighting for, we don't see the need of giving the aid. No. But let's move on to what opening opposition wanted to talk to you about. They told you can use election to solve this problem. We tell you election will not be able to solve this problem. This problem is not happening in 4 years' time, which we will only have this 4 years to overthrow the government, to actually vote it out. If this would happen, we don't think that violence will actually exist. But what's happening is they get suppressed and oppression and discrimination happen in them for many, many years. We have gone through many elections, but we couldn't be able to overthrow this government. We cannot get, these protestants cannot get what they actually want. We think that this is when you actually need to go to violence. Closing.
Even if we agree and we give you the benefit of doubt that the state doesn't involve themselves in this conflict, the people from the majority race which you inflict violence against, well, might as well just start a conflict against this minority.
No, we think that the majority people deserve to be harmed. They deserve to be the violence that what the state actually give them, because they are the one that did not want to fight for them. They are the one that actually discriminated them to force them to this corner that the only way out is violence. No. But opening also want to talk to you about how on our side, no change will occur. Okay, we think that on our side, this debate is not about whether change will actually occur, but it's about whether it is legitimate for the protesters to use illegal means to get out of their way, to get what they actually want. But if we think that the government does not include them, the law does not abide to them, we don't see the need for the citizens to abide to the law. But after opening to try to talk to you about how it will harm the movement. We don't think that there's something to harm the movement. The movement has nothing to begin with. They never had international support. We don't think that they will lose international support in this certain case. We think that why do the protesters even want to fight? Because they have nothing now. They want to get something. We don't think there's anything to lose from this movement. I think that in the fact that they actually need to go to violence and get illegal and go to illegal means before they can get what they want, we think that other problems will not be able to exist. Democracy that you wanted to fight for cannot exist. But let's look at why closing government took today's debate. We told you about how illegal means are not normal illegal means and why it is legitimate because there is a moral clause behind it. We told you about how if the law and the government does not want to include you as part of society, we don't see why they should actually care the society when nobody cared about them. Nobody fought for them. What they did is continuously discriminate them. Even the innocent citizens that you wanted to talk about, we are very proud to win.
Finals, we thank you, member. Wait to call upon the final speaker of the final.
Hello. Okay. What side government wants is they are willing to allow the nation to continue to suffer. They are willing to allow civil wars to happen, where displacement occurs, where the whole nation will never recover for the purpose of change. And we on side opposition beg to differ from it, because we will be telling you the explicit harms in the process of these civil wars that they so fully endorse, and what are the harms that will last forever and the nation will never recover. Firstly, several points of rebuttals to Deb's case. When she came up here just now, she talked about basic principles, how the majority cannot come, the majority has caused acts of inhumanities and a Tibet where laws and these people have no rights. So now we tell you now, what happens to the innocent people on the ground when you allow these kind of civil wars to happen? What happens to the lives lost in the process when you allow this protest to happen? Lives will be lost. What we want is a slow transition that would ensure safety of society forever, rather than their side that allows harms to happen in the process and the nation will never recover. And it also creates an irreversible harm. Sit down, don't panic. Okay. And it also brings, now we can draw you an example of the cycle of oppression. We give you an example of Burkina Faso, Libya, Cote d'Ivoire, for example. Now they talk about how they want to endorse civil wars. They would allow any means of illegal oppression in order to bring change. But we tell you one thing, we can give you several examples, and we can give you examples that no nation where these protests have actually brought change as a whole. For example, in nations like Cote d'Ivoire, it started from silent protests, and in the end it became a civil war. And Cote d'Ivoire, up to today, has never recovered from it. The people live in agony. The people are so poor, and the economy is at the downturn, and over decades since the end of the civil war, the nation has never recovered, and that's why we feel that should have happened. Secondly, she talked about how the illegal means can be used to bring change on laws against it, such as against a law that is against people on the ground, such as illegitimate ways that can be used to change the law. Let me tell you one thing, the illegitimate use and violent protests and civil laws that can lead to lives being lost and also an economic downturn. Now, why is this economic downturn why is this economic downturn so harmful? Let me draw you an example where when now people protest because the situation on the ground is so bad. How will the situation on the ground become worse after the protest and violence? Why? Because business will get shut down. People will no longer invest in their countries. Businesses will no longer work because of this. And that is why when the economic downturn happens, the nation falls into recession, all these kind of things, and nothing can overturn it. And that is why we feel it is so harmful that I'll engage on later on. And she talked about how when it's no longer a possible change, then only they will have these violent results. We tell you that it's a fair trade-off. Why is it a fair trade-off? Because their violent means harm the nations forever. And we can never ensure that these violent means will bring change. We can never ensure that the rebel-led government can bring change in the country. We can never assure that oppression goes on. But under our side, we can ensure the lives of the people will never be further harmed. But before that, yes, opening.
Civil wars are about gaining neutrality. But even if these people do get power, there is international action that facilitates democracy, like in Libya, Mali, and Rwanda. The point is that our case will always have a situation where we try to facilitate rights of minorities and facilitate rights of discriminated. How is that working under your paradigm?
How is it working under paradigm? Now, how is it working under your paradigm when you resort to all these kind of protests? Now, you gave an example of Libya. We can tell you that there's no stability in Libya now. Since these rebels take over, where can we see stability in Libya? There is no sort of stability in Libya right now. And it is civil wars over civil wars, and these things are never coming to an end. Now, just now when Jolie came up here, several points of rebuttal, she tried to make the Evan case. She talked about how it strengthens the protesters, how it strengthens the protesters are normally minorities. We tell you one thing, protesters are not necessarily the minorities. Protesters can arise as a whole, sit down. The protesters can come as a whole. Now, what are the harms of this? Now, when the protesters and all come as a whole, let's draw an example where the whole country goes against the government. What happens to that? That only happens, what is the harm? That displacement will happen. All these kind of displacement that happens will never change anything because the cycle continues. And when people have examples such as displacement, where people flee to neighboring countries as refugees and so on, how can this ever bring change? And even if there is change, it will take forever for the countries to recover again. It will take forever for families to be united, for lives and the people to continue to reach that. So we don't see how change under their side. But under side opposition, we can guarantee the safety of the people, even though it is a slow process. And we tell you that it is a fair trade-off. And also, she talked about how the people should help them, why they shouldn't be protests, and these neutral people who don't want to get involved in the war, why should the people help them? Now we tell you, why should you resort to violence in the first place? Why must you force these people who are satisfied with the country to come and oppress, to be oppressed and get involved in this? Why must we do that? What we can ensure is a slow transition and so on that could lead to that. And secondly, she also tried to rebut about the government panic and change can happen. Now, we give you an example where government change, such as, for example, Yemen. The government fled in Yemen after violent protests. The president had to flee Yemen. Ali Abdullah Saleh had to flee Yemen because the protesters shot an RPG into his house and caused him to flee to Saudi Arabia to get treatment. How is that so harmful? Because what happened when he fled? A military takeover happened in the country, and we don't see change in the country. For the change that what they want to demand for, we don't see any change there because the people are never satisfied. And we can see now the Yemen is trying to be the breakup of Yemen is at its brink, so we don't see any harm. And you talk about how the majority government overthrown, and when the minority government takes over, why? And when majority gets oppressed, we shouldn't mind that. We tell you one thing, there are no difference between them when they say that those people who oppress them and when they win, they take over it. We tell you that they do not bring any change because what they do is they only make people the same thing. But before that, yes, that.
We told you the reason we prioritize the minorities because the safety of the people, it can be guaranteed the government will protect them. What is not resolvable is the hell the minorities live every day because of your policies.
Well, when these minorities take over, they give hell back to the majority. How the hell will the country ever be united? It will be an everlasting hell that will now be changed. So please wake up and see. When minorities go against majority, how will that bring change? Be sensible that. And after that, now Jolie never tackled on the issue about how it continues the cycle of violence. Why Jolie didn't tackle it, we don't know why she didn't. But we tell you that this cycle will continue to happen again and again because people will now be satisfied. We can never ensure the same government. Now heading over to opening government, they came up here and she talked about how civil wars that are for good means should happen. Why is civil wars so harmful? Civil war does not bring change because all it does is it breaks up the countries, breaks away the unification of the country where people have to flee to several parts of the country. How will that ever bring change? And also very quickly, he also talked about how there's a need for social change. There's a need for social change before it can be moral. Fine. However, the social change that happens due to illegal protests that bring harms are worse. For example, the displacement of people, refugees, and these social change. And very quickly, lastly, about how the minorities that have been oppressed. We tell you that the violence would not only harm the majority, but the minorities themselves. That is why they flee as refugees to other countries. How will the nation ever recover? We don't know, and it will take forever to recover. So if you want to ensure that our country stays forever peaceful, side by side opposition, because we allow a slow change that would lead to peaceful.